stand as we say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Please be seated. Charles, you
Hello.
come up and give us an invitation.
Seems like a long time ago we did that.
I've been running since before this. Yeah.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we pray that you will touch our hearts and guide us on the path of righteousness. And as members of the Mariemont Civic Association, inspire us to continue MCA's tradition of service to the community. May we be judged good and faithful servants. Lord, we pray for our elected leaders on the local, state, and national levels. And in particular, bless our guest speaker, Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Grant to him wisdom and statesmanship, what John F. Kennedy called a profile in courage, to confront and find solutions to the challenges facing our country. Our thoughts are also with the men and women of our armed forces. Bless them, O Lord, for their willingness to go into harm's way, not only to defend the oppressed of other nations, but also to uphold the freedoms that make America an exceptional nation. Finally, Lord, bless the village of Mariemont, the state of Ohio, and the United States of America, and lead us in the direction you would have us go. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Charles. All right, we have an exciting evening here with Brad Wenstrup with us. So,
Judge Berkowitz is here.
oh, very good. Okay. Well, let's do this. You want to, would you do new business or have the judge come
Yeah,
up
go ahead
first?
and go through that. Kissinger's not here, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's we'll first have our report from our treasurer here.
Well, we had some disbursements of $1,689.61. That went to the Boathouse patio donation that we donated to. The Porsche Rally, $500 there. Merchants Mixer, we gave $500. And of course, Barber Gun for May and September refreshments. Now, Dan and Dennis did a very good job at the rally. They took their fancy little raffle bottle, or whatever you want to call that thing with duct tape, and they took in $101 in raffle tickets. And so that was our one deposit. So beginning balance was $9,819.80. Ending balance $8,881.19. And if you are not receiving the emails from Bob, please see me because we need to compare some of the emails. I think there's some that are incorrect. Okay? Thanks.
Very good. Thanks. And the money for the Porsche Rally went for security, not as a down payment for Barber Gun or anything like that. So.
Shoot, he lied to me. That's how he got me there.
Very good. So, yeah, very worthwhile community event. So, good. Now, do we have, Joe, do you want to give an update on the calendars at this point? Or
Yeah, well,
wait?
we're gonna have them at the next meeting.
Okay.
So we have a holiday meeting. What's the date of that again?
It's a third Thursday in November.
You sure? Then because that's around Thanksgiving, isn't it usually a little bit later?
No, we aren't having the December one, right?
In
We're going to have
November.
the third Thursday, we won't have a December meeting. Of
Yeah.
Christmas. which is-
Right. But it is a third Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, third Thursday, November. So that should be before Thanksgiving. It's not the, well, obviously it's not Thanksgiving. It's before Thanksgiving.
Well, it'll be at that meeting.
Okay, at that meeting. So, you know, and Joe is very humble about it, but he puts a lot of effort into just producing a fantastic calendar that has all sorts of historical images and the current images from the village, and I think we've all seen Joe around walking the village as he takes pictures, and it really is something that's quite special. So to get them for yourselves, to get them as gifts, so they'll be available then at that meeting and after. Right. And then there'll be places around the village where they'll be available as well, is that right?
Yes, they'll be at the Villager, the Mary Elders, the two and Raiders, usually those three sources.
Great, thanks, very good. Good, and then Dennis?
I'm here.
Oh, there, you want to just tell us a little bit about
Yeah, I do.
the train?
First, I want to say something about the calendars. We sent one to our son who now lives in Denver. And of course, he grew up in the village, and he loves that calendar. So you needn't just buy it for yourself. It makes a great gift, especially if someone is grown up in the village. You know, every year we do this train thing, and this is a lot of work to put together. And I really think we could probably do a little better on the ticket sales. And this is without question the best condition one I've come up with over the summer. So, you know, let's really hawk this thing. It's a great gift. You know, when we had this thing running, these little kids, I thought trains were dead. You know, I grew up digging them, and it turns out, and these kids, you can't get them away from the table. So if you even have grandkids or a neighbor friend, it makes a great gift. And it does come with a lifetime warranty as long as I'm around. I'll keep them. Cynthia keeps telling me I'm too old to do a lot of stuff, and I keep telling her, if you keep telling me that, I'll start believing it. But I think you're good for about 20 years anyway. So
Tell them what it is, exactly.
this is a 1955 line-out O-gauge train, and it's an old heavy metal. You drop this on your foot, you're going to the podiatrist. And it's oh, we have one? Oh, no, you're. I'm sure you've seen these injuries. This is the really. No, I don't. I've done it enough on my own anyway. But they just don't make stuff like this anymore. And this is all metal, and it's all been reconditioned. And if you want to add on to it, they do still produce equipment for this that works right in. So it's still alive and well. And the tickets are $1 a pop, 6 for $5. And let's get out there and make more than $1,100 or $1,200 this year. I think we could double that if we really try. And if you don't, Dan will be on your back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Merry
Good.
Christmas
Well,
early.
Great, thanks, Dennis. No, yeah, Dennis puts a lot of effort every year, and just a fantastic train. It's, I think, nostalgia, and that kind of class model is just not something you can get easily. So we appreciate that.
It is a value of about, if you went to a hobby shop, you'd pay about $350 or $400 for it. And I doubt they would have one that nice, because it would be grabbed up by a collector. So it's really extraordinarily good condition.
Great, thanks. Great, thanks, Dennis. Well, good. So Dan's got raffle tickets, and so if you want to buy tickets and put them in a pot, if you want to sell tickets, we've got stacks. If you want to take a stack and buy it yourself and put the tickets in, that's always an option. And so see Dan for that. Good. I think that's pretty much our old business for tonight. So Dan, you want to come up and?
Yeah. Also, I'd like to add to it, what has it been, 5 years, Dennis, we've been putting these trains together? And I want to thank Matt Nickum, who prints these up for us. I know he's not here, and he lives in Terrace Park and all that stuff, but he prints them up for us for free. So, at his printing shop, so if you see him, thank you. And send business his way. I know we're running out of time, so first we'll have Judge Berkowitz come up and give us a few words. We appreciate him coming. And if anybody wants, now that the Bengals are doing well, he's got a little card here with the Bengals schedule on the back. And I have a bunch of them, so if you want one, it's all yours. Thank you, sir.
Are postseason dates on that ticket?
That would have been pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take complete credit for the success, but I will accept it as an endorsement. So, Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I did bring some props or propaganda, depending on how you look at it. I don't know if you want to kind of take one and pass them back. Thank you very much. Dan, you're familiar with this, so I am very pleased with how it turned out. It tells you a little bit about me. I am the judge in the Hamilton County Municipal Court. Our cases, to tell you a little bit about municipal court, our cases come from all over the county, but we're one of the, I think, the only county in Ohio that that has districts. We run in a district rather than county-wide. All the other judges in the county have to run in the whole county. I run in a district. Mine includes the village of Mariemont. I'll be on your ballot this November, along with Judge Kurt Kissinger. You'll have two very important judicial votes this year. And I am running a contested election, I expect to be a very tight election. And I'm here to ask for your support and your help. It's been an honor to serve. I was appointed by Governor Kasich in April of this year when Judge Megan Shanahan was appointed to the Common Pleas Court. So when that seat was vacated, the governor appointed me to fill it. The way that works is when you get appointed, you run in the very next election. So for me, that's this November in about 19 days, but I'm not counting. Municipal court is a wonderful place to work. It is the busiest court in the county by far. We do all felony arraignments, we do all misdemeanors, all traffic offenses, we do civil cases under $15,000. So it is very much the people's court. It is the broadest cross-section of the public that comes before the court. It is the widest array of attorneys that comes before the court, and it is, I believe, the largest proportion of the parties that proceed without an attorney or pro se. So what that means for me is that it keeps me on my toes. You never really can get too comfortable or think that you know what to expect in a given case. You just never know what's coming, and that makes it very interesting. We've been very busy. We handle anywhere from 30 to 100 cases every morning, criminal and traffic cases. My very first day we had a jury trial, and we've had a bunch of those since. We've had a little bit of everything. Prior to taking the bench, I was an assistant Hamilton County prosecutor. Those gentlemen that you can see on your on that flyer you're holding, those are all individuals that I personally prosecuted for aggravated murder. They're all doing life sentences as a result of those prosecutions, so I'm very proud of that. Got to do a little bit of everything as a county prosecutor, all types of felonies, violent crimes, sex offenses, heroin trafficking. I also served as the law director in the city of Norwood, which was a very great experience. A lot of different areas of law, economic development, contract negotiation. We closed down the Quality Hotel on Montgomery Road, which I was very proud of that. That had unfortunately become a real cesspool, an eyesore, kind of hidden in plain sight with heroin trafficking and prostitution activities, unfortunately. So we shut that down. It remains closed. We're hoping that, I'm hoping, it's not my job anymore, but I'm hoping for that becomes gets brought back to a positive use for the community. But that was a very neat experience. Love to open it up for questions. To tell you, a little bit about what I'm talking about on the campaign as I go out and meet people. Municipal court, for most of the people who come to court, is their very first contact with the justice system. Whether as defendants or witnesses or victims or jurors, most of the people that come into my courtroom this is their first trip to court. And that experience is going to color their view of the justice system and the court system for the rest of their lives. And so I take it as my personal responsibility to make sure that they walk away from the experience, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. I want them to come away and know that the judge treated them fairly, listened to what they had to say, and explained what was going on. Because when they walk away, they're likely not going to remember the name of their attorney, believe it or not. They don't remember the public defender's name. They don't remember the prosecutor's name, I can promise you that, because I used to be one. And in all likelihood, they're not going to remember the judge's name. All they're going to remember is the system, and whether the system treated them fairly or not. You're not going to please everybody when you take on a job like this. Any decision you make is going to make someone unhappy. But I hope that they walk away from the experience knowing that the judge gave them their day in court, treated them fairly, followed the law, and explained what was happening. So that's what I'm working hard to do every day, and that's why I'm honored to ask for your vote on November 3rd. Happy to take any questions, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Yes, sir.
The epidemic of the cocaine and heroin, which is just, epidemic is even really understated. It's just amazing to me. A lot of people don't even hear about. I know bulk of it, I think, without knowing all the facts, is in northern Kentucky, but it's in all the school districts and communities. I know you're on the back end of the whole process. On the front end, what are some of the things that are proactively being done that you know of to minimize that and where it's heading?
Well, what I can tell you is this. First of all, it's everywhere. It's not just coming from northern Kentucky. It's everywhere. It is, which is really the most insidious aspect of this epidemic, is that it is touching all communities, in many cases all families. It cuts across a lot of the lines in our community that traditionally divided, for instance, the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s. I mean, this is hitting nice communities, well-to-do families, private schools, public schools. I mean, it just knows no limits. Race, class, gender, everyone is susceptible, and so it is a very disturbing trend. There was just a case in my courtroom yesterday of the woman that was stopped on 275. Another driver noticed her driving so badly and so erratically that he took it upon himself, a private citizen took it upon himself to record her with his cell phone and actually took action to force her off the road. This was at 5 o'clock in the evening on 275 on a weekday. So, but for that action of a private citizen, I am convinced that that would have ended just terribly tragically. I've been amazed at the number of heroin-related driving offenses in my courtroom, and that has changed drastically even since I was a municipal court prosecutor, which was last in 2012. It has just exploded. So to answer your question, we've done very well, I think, in terms of providing some treatment alternatives through our justice system. We have wonderful treatment programs through the jail. The Talbert House offers some outstanding programs. Governor Kasich has led the way in promoting treatment as part of a prison sentence, which is generally not part of municipal court, but nonetheless it's part of a picture. The police have been very proactive. We've become part of we have some outstanding detectives and narcotics agents in Hamilton County who are working hard to interrupt the supply. What I hope and what concerns me and what I really can't answer about your question is, there needs to be, in my opinion, a concerted, consistent effort to educate people to try to stop the problem before it starts. And I think there's still a lot of misconception about heroin and how it works and how it develops. And there's still this notion in a lot of people's mind that somebody's going to wake up one day and decide out of the blue, I'm going to start intravenously injecting heroin. And it's a much slower, much more step-by-step progression than that. And it often starts, in my opinion, with kids drinking and smoking marijuana between the ages of 10 and 12. That progresses to harder drugs. It progresses to taking medication out of their parents' medicine cabinet or out of their friend's parents' medicine cabinet. Taking pills that way, which progresses to crushing pills up and snorting them, which progresses to, that becomes too expensive, and they start getting heroin that they can snort, which eventually doesn't produce the high that they're looking for. And at that point, once you've reached that point, all of a sudden using a needle doesn't seem like such the unthinkable act that it does for you or I. So I think there's still a lot of confusion, a lot of denial in a lot of communities and schools and households, excuse me, that what appears to be, or what is easy to brush off as somewhat, oh, he's in college or he's in high school and he's got some wild oats to sow, can actually be the warning signs of somebody who's developing a problem. Because once you get to that point where you're using a needle, I mean, that's just a devastating addiction to overcome. Terribly difficult, not just on that individual, but on their families. They're often the victims of all sorts of serious crimes, burglaries and thefts and so forth. So it's very, very painful for the people who are involved. And I hope that there's that concerted effort going on in our schools and in our neighborhoods. Yes, sir.
Issues 2 and 3, what's your take on those?
Well, when you take the bench, one of the things that you give up is your First Amendment right. I'm not particularly permitted to endorse or oppose a ballot issue or another candidate for office. What I'll say about that is, and kind of I'll relay it like this. What I'm hearing throughout the community is that there's a pretty widespread opposition or concern with the notion of writing a kind of cartel into the state constitution. That's one major concern that I hear repeatedly, even amongst people. And look, anybody who's involved in the court system will tell you that the laws regarding marijuana need to be changed. There are a lot of problems. One of them, just by way of example, right now, if somebody gets caught with a pipe that's used to smoke marijuana, that's a misdemeanor of the 4th degree. They face the possibility of 30 days in jail. They face a mandatory driver's license suspension. If they get caught with anywhere under 100 grams of marijuana, 100 grams of marijuana is a lot of marijuana. I mean, that's a lot more than one guy smoking a joint. That's a minor misdemeanor. That's a payout ticket. That's like getting a speeding ticket. So the fact that the pipe is a more serious crime than the actual marijuana, look, there are problems with the law. I think there's a lot of consensus around that. There's a lot of concern with writing that cartel notion into the state constitution. The other problem that I personally have that I don't hear as much about is that right now it's still a Schedule I controlled substance to the federal government. So to me, we're all kind of putting the cart before the horse. So long as it's a Schedule I controlled substance, we're all operating under this notion that the Obama administration has frankly looked the other way in states like Colorado and Washington. Well, that might not always be that way. Whether it's this administration or the next, they may choose to enforce the law very differently. And that's why in Colorado I'm hearing they're having real problems. None of the banks will do business with the industry that's popped up there. Even though it's legal there, the banks that have to comply with federal regulation won't do business, so you end up with kind of a television-like scenario, TV show type of, warehouses full of cash that have to be guarded and are subject to robberies and all kinds of problems that way. So that's another concern that I think. Yes, sir.
So do you think that the Department of Justice should be a wing of the executive branch, or should they be just enforcing the laws that are on the books?
Well, I think it's very, very problematic when you have the executive branch picking and choosing which laws to enforce, which laws not to enforce. First of all, it's a constitutional problem. That's not how the framers designed our system of government, where the President of the United States and his cabinet members get to decide which laws passed by Congress they're going to enforce. And second, kind of getting back to that issue, it creates this confusion in the public. What's legal, what's not, what kind of business can I operate? Is it a legitimate business, or is it a black market? So I think under a number of areas that is a real concern, that you have a Justice Department right now in Washington, D.C. that is openly picking and choosing which laws they're going to enforce. And that goes way beyond prosecutorial discretion. That is changing the nature of our government from one where a legislature passes laws and an executive enforces it, to one where the executive takes on this kind of super authority that doesn't exist in the Constitution. Yes, sir.
As an extension of that, I get concerned that it delegitimizes the justice system when laws are selectively enforced. So beyond just confusion, I think it creates potential for resistance, and so on. I think it's just delegitimizing what you do for a living. That's one of my concerns.
Absolutely. I'll wrap it up. It gets back to my point. I think we're experiencing a crisis of confidence in our justice system throughout the country, and that's a real problem, not just in this community but throughout the country. When people don't think they're going to get a fair shake in the justice system, that's when Baltimore happens. That's when Ferguson happens. Joe Dieters will tell you that a lot of the violence in our community is attributable to the fact that people don't think they're going to get justice through the courts. They want to take matters into their own hands. So it's get back and revenge and vendettas and so forth. So I do think that notion that the law applies to some and not to others is very, very dangerous. That's the perception that we're battling, and that's why I'm trying so hard to make sure, because you can see it on people's faces when they come into the courtroom. They expect to be mistreated. They expect to get railroaded, and that's tragic to me. We have the greatest system of justice that the world has ever seen, but there's all this negative, there's all this bad messaging out there, and so we have an obligation to do better and to make sure that people walk away knowing they were treated fairly in court. Thank you very much.
This is an endorsement comment. I have a friend, I won't mention the name, who's an assistant prosecutor for Joe Dieters. She's been there 9 years. And I mentioned, when you came to the other meeting this summer, I mentioned that I met you, and what did she think of you? And she goes, "You are great. You are so good as a judge," and she loves when she has to work with you. I thought, so that's an endorsement for you.
Thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz.
That's in the mail. Thank you very much.
Okay, I know we're running out of time here, and Kissinger's not here, I guess, Judge Kissinger?
Oh, no, thank you very much.
He's not here, so we'll go with our main attraction.
Appreciate it.
I think this is an exciting time in Washington, and what better to have as our congressman here to explain what is going on here. Brad, would you come up and give us...
I think we all know Brad. I remember back when we were with the barn, and he came in his Army uniform, and we were all so impressed, and he came back and did the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast a couple years ago. And, of course, Brad wears many hats. He was educated here in Cincinnati, and then he, as a doctor, is a podiatric surgeon and worked for many years doing that. And then he's in the Army Reserves as a lieutenant colonel. And what I didn't, and I think this is incredible, is that I guess to keep your reservist status up, you work at Walter Reed and do surgery at Walter Reed Memorial Hospital in Bethesda. I think that's incredible. And then, of course, as U.S. Representative, and frankly, when I think of, I get very depressed for what I see going on in Washington. Brad is the image that comes forth of someone who I have hope in, and I think many of us feel that way. So we appreciate you always being with us, and thanks for being here today.
My
Brad.
pleasure.
Thank you for your service.
So So before I get started, I want to say the first time I saw the name Berkowitz on someone's shirt or uniform as it was the surgeon I replaced in Iraq was Josh's brother. And so I got to go all the way to Iraq to meet his brother, but that's where we met and that's how I got to know him. And obviously a family that's proud to serve their community. And I think a lot of Josh, and he's done a great job with everything he's touched. And I appreciate that you're up and running again, and good luck in 19 days. Bring it home for us because we need people like you, and I appreciate that. You mentioned some of my background, and that's part of why I ran. I never expected to be doing all these things necessarily. I joined the reserves in '98 because we kept getting attacked, and I thought if I need to go somewhere, I'd be willing to go. And I just called 1-800-USA-ARMY. And, I started looking at Washington, and people were saying, why don't you run for office? And we do. It's true. We have people in Washington making business decisions that never ran a business, and military decisions that never served in the military, and healthcare decisions that never saw a patient. And so I really felt that there might be a role that we could have there. And I think that that's happening. It's a very difficult time, but in the context of the way Congress operates, I think we are making a difference, albeit slow. A lot of times it's at the committee level. It's at the things that you don't see that get all the news. But it's a challenging thing as well. I can tell you when I'm in my scrubs and white coat and I'm dealing with a patient, I can tell they trust me. And when I'm in my uniform and I'm out and about talking to people, I can tell that they trust me. But when you put the congressional pin on, all bets are off. As far as that goes. I'm really proud to serve this community and in this area because we really are lucky in Ohio. There's a lot of problems in the world, there's a lot of problems in our country, but we have a lot of good people right here in southern Ohio all along this river. And that gives us great opportunities. Just recently got a book about the Wright brothers, and there's a quote in there from Wilbur Wright where he says, if I'm asked to give a young man advice on how to succeed in life, I would tell him, pick out a good mother and father and begin in Ohio. And so I think that was a great quote in there. But it's been an interesting time in Washington, needless to say. The Pope came to visit, which was a big deal, and it was so nice to see. We had beautiful weather. We had all these people in Washington, D.C., and they weren't protesting. I mean, it really was a sight to behold to see that sea of people. And there's no litter, there's no problem. It was really wonderful to see, and I think that the Pope, while he was here, learned a lot about America. If you really are here and you can see and you see firsthand, for example, what our faith-based churches and hospitals and schools do for the community here in America, because we are a free country, because we have free markets and capitalism, I think he learned something that capitalism here is different than it is where he came from. And that's understandably so. But it was out on the balcony for the final moment in Washington, D.C., and he's up there with John Boehner, and I've seen John Boehner cry, and I've seen him lose it, but boy, it was over the top. And I looked at him and I said to myself, I think he's done. I think this is it. Because as he's standing up there as a Catholic with the Pope, he's saying, I don't think I can do much better than this. And there's been all this disarray within the conference and everything else. And sure enough, that's what happened the next day. He said he was going to go. So there's a little turmoil. It's a difficult job, and nobody seems to really want it, and understandably so. It's you're attacked from all sides these days, and that's a shame. I always take the approach that when it comes to speaker, we vote in our conference ahead of time. And last time, no one ran against John Boehner, but even in a race of 2 or 3 people, whatever the case may be, if the person I vote for doesn't win, and someone else does, that's who I'm going to vote for on the floor. Because we need to come out and stand there in unity and move on and get the business of the country done and stop this infighting. You don't get everything you want when you're up there. But we're dealing with some of the things we sort of talked on today. I wrote a piece several months ago called Irrelevant Representation, how challenging it is to be in Congress today. Because it's not operating the way it's supposed to operate. When you have executive actions, I'm for executive actions when we're in an emergency and we need things to be done right away, the president has to act, then go ahead and act. But when you're putting out executive actions and you've already said, I don't have the authority to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, that undermines the legislative process. That's not how it's supposed to work. And we've had multiple lawsuits under this administration, unfortunately, and we've won a few of them. That's not how it's supposed to work. And when you have a Department of Justice that decides what laws they want to enforce and what laws they don't want to, that's a problem. And when you have a Supreme Court that rather than saying, this is confusing, this law doesn't make sense, it's debatable, send it back to the legislator and let them define it. But don't you define it. It's not up to you to decide. You either interpret it one way or the other, but if you're not sure, send it back and let the legislators do their job. But that's what we're dealing with, and then the biggest offense of all is what's taken place over the last 50 or 60 years, and that's with regulating agencies. When our country started, we had Department of Defense, Department of War, Department of Treasury. That was it. That was it. Look what we got today. Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development. It just goes on and on and on, EPA, etc. And the problem is, they have rule of law. What we do in Congress, we end up hearing what the agencies are going to do, and we as congressmen write letters and say, please don't do this. You know, the people don't want that. Please don't do that. It's going to hurt business. What are you basing this on? It should be the other way around. Remember, our Constitution was written, it said, we the people give the government the right to do A, B, and C. In other countries, it's very clear the other way around, where the government tells the people what they have the right to do. So the system has become contorted, and each and every American, either side of the aisle, has got to stand up and say it's got to stop. Or else we're not going to be able to progress the way that we have for so many years in this country. And we are so lucky in this country. We have so many gifts that are just sitting in our lap, and we're messing it up. But going back to the regulations in the House, the past 3 Congresses, we passed what's called the REINS Act. The REINS Act says if a federal agency has a new regulation and has a negative economic impact of over $100 million, and I've yet to see a regulation that had a positive economic impact, but if it has a negative economic impact, Congress has to vote on it. That gives you the chance to weigh in on it with your representative and be able to say, we don't like this. This is not what America wants. This is not what the people want. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, we pass it in the House, but in the Senate, it's never been taken up. And so it sits. And it probably would be vetoed by the president anyway. I'm concerned about so many things. I look at our country, and when I'm dealing with things, I want to think about what's this mean over the next 20 years or beyond. You know, we shouldn't be in Washington just to be serving ourselves. We got to take care of the problems of the day, but you better be looking out for the next generation, because I promise you, generations before us did. And when I talk to college kids, and I say, you think all this stuff that the government does today is so cool, I just want you to know you're paying for it. You know, we get ridiculed for passing a budget that pays off the debt in 40 years. Well, I'm 57. I'd be 97 then. That's not for me. That's for the next generation. And suddenly the light bulb goes off in young people. And I said, you're going to be sitting there someday with your spouse going, oh, that gray-haired guy was right, man. We are stuck with this problem now. And I contend that we're living in the most selfish generation America's ever had. Because think about it. 233 years and 43 presidents, we were $10 trillion in debt. 6 years later, 1 president, $18 trillion in debt. That is pretty selfish, folks. That is pretty selfish. And there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that we're taking care of the American people. I like our safety nets. I like the fact that we put in programs like Medicaid to try and help those that are down. But the potential, the mission of these types of programs should be that they don't have to exist. That they're there because any one of us could find ourselves in a situation someday where we're down and out and in need. And thank God we have a country that cares and will come up and help us. But we should be able to step away from that. The goal should be to come away from that, be independent. You know, sometimes I think when we look at what's going on in America and we say, this is the wrong direction, it is the wrong direction. But we seem to keep going, I credit 2 things. One, I credit the American people who have a drive that's not seen really anywhere else in the world. And no matter what is laid in front of them, they're going to go out and do the right thing and do better things and try and make things happen. But the other thing that I think is happening in the world today is we're probably the best of all the bad decision makers. Other countries are doing things worse. And we're seeing the results of that, like in Greece, and then you look at the problems that Europe has. You know, so if you want to follow that course, why would you? It doesn't make sense. They're falling apart. I'm concerned about our military. You know, our military traditionally has been one where evildoers fear us, and those that are in need await our arrival and pray for our arrival. That's what our military has been. That's what our national defense has been about. And we can be proud that we had allies around the world that count on us, and we count on them, and we're seeing that slip away. When you draw red lines with invisible ink, you start to lose credibility. And that's what's happening today. And I know because I travel around. And I will tell you, I spent more time with Benjamin Netanyahu than I have with President Obama. And that's just how it is today. And Democrats will tell you the same thing. Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't talk to us either. This is a situation we face. But on the military front, we're letting our military drop down to dangerous levels. The generals will tell you that. We're fighting like mad to keep our military at a certain strength that will make things possible for us to defend our country. I just sent a letter with 22 other members of the House Armed Services Committee to the President saying we think it's extremely dangerous at this time to downsize in Afghanistan. We have invested 14 years of life and limb to go after the country that enabled Osama bin Laden to attack the United States of America. I don't want to give that up like we just did in Iraq. I served in Iraq for a year. You know, I can tell you, I think those that have been to war appreciate peace more than anybody else. We understand what war is about, we don't like it. But at the same time, we understand what it takes to defend a country, and we understand the sacrifice that goes in to liberate a country. And right now, Afghanistan wants us there. So I guess the letter had some effect, because the President reversed his decision today. He's going to, at least for next year, keep troops at the level that the Afghan government says that they need to be able to sustain themselves. And you don't want to have the same thing happen there that happened in Iraq. But we're being pushed around today, unfortunately. You know, you've got Iran and Russia in Iraq. You've got Iran and Russia in Syria. You've got Russia in the Ukraine. And every time they shake the President's hand or John Kerry's hand, they say, oh, we're good. We're not going to do this. They go, okay, and walk back, and boom, Russia moves right in. They're now attacking our allies on the ground in Syria after they said they were there just to go after ISIS. These are great concerns, and I have concerns about the Taliban in Afghanistan, and I really pray that that never happens, that it comes back again to the level it was. These are people that appreciate America and are glad that we're there, and we've got to make sure that we keep that presence there. And also, we need to stay. You know, we go places that are dangerous, we win, we liberate, and we stay as an ally, and we stay as a friend, and we're postured. National security is extremely important to so many Americans today. It's one of the tops of the polls. And why? Because of the things going on in this world. You know, we are seeing people right here in Ohio that have been radicalized without ever meeting a Muslim from the Middle East. They did it all online. And they've been caught in the attacks thanks to the good work of the FBI. We've been very fortunate in that regard. These are serious issues, and I believe that one of the things we really have to embrace is our border security. One, for national security. Two, if we're ever going to have a legal immigration system. One that allows people that want to come to America to be Americans, to be good citizens. We need border security, and we need to be able to have that so we can ensure that our immigration system works. And then we have to worry about things like Ebola, and we want to make sure that we can monitor these types of things. We know who's coming in and out of our country. And then one of the things that was touched on earlier was the heroin epidemic. When I talk to the sheriffs, where's it coming from? They say from the borders, north and south. It's not just the southern border. If we don't address these issues, these problems are just going to continue to grow. And real quickly on the drug question that you asked before. So that's at the very front end of it, right? How does it get into the country, for one? The other thing is I'm seeing sheriffs in communities that are starting with kids in 4th and 5th grade, just starting to teach them about the evils of what's out there. Separating pills from candy, things like that, because so many people get started by taking pills. The big question comes in once we have someone, whether they're arrested or whatever the case may be, what are we doing with rehab? So many people relapse. Well, that's a concern, because what happens when they get out, they've got a record or this and that, they can't get a job. Nothing's really changed for them. And we have to, if we're going to be successful, there has to be some level of opportunity on the other end of that for those that do actually go on to rehab. It's a big process, and it's a long train if you look at it from the beginning to the end and how we address it. So it has to be addressed on every level, and local communities are stepping up to try and do whatever they can. We see a lot of violence in this world today, and every time we do, you know, we talk about more controls and more controls on the people, but the common denominator in all these cases of violence typically come down to mental illness. And in the House, we have a psychologist, Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, and he has crafted a bill with many others that I think address many of the issues today. It's very difficult because of the laws in place for family members to be able to say, we have a member of our family that has a problem, but because of HIPAA violations and privacy, they can't get engaged with the person's care. Do you know that 70 years ago we had 600,000 psych beds in America? Today, we have just over 40,000. Do you know if a hospital has over 16 psych beds, they get no reimbursement for psychiatric care whatsoever in their hospital? Driving it out into the community. You know, these are people that need care. These are people that we need to embrace and make sure that they're taken care of, and there has to be a transition. I used to see patients on the psych ward, and what I'd see what would happen is they'd be in there, they'd get better, they'd get out, not get their medicines, not have follow-up, and then wind up in the emergency room and back in again. And so this was a cycle. And so there's the other component on what do you do once they're out of the hospital. But I think this bill addresses it very well, and I hope that we take that up because it would make a big difference. One other thing that's important to me that I like to talk about, because you don't hear many people talking about, is really poverty in America. If you look at the last election, and neither candidate really spoke about poverty. And we have a lot of things that can be done at local levels, but also in Washington, we've got to take a look at how we're taking care of those in need and what are their opportunities beyond that. How do we get them from poverty to prosperity? And right now we have a system where too often people are punished if they take a job. And to me, the greatest social reform someone could have is a job. There's a school in Greenfield, Ohio with this beautiful mural of people working out in the fields, etc., and underneath it says, to rejoice in his labor, for it is a gift from God. And I think that that's the approach that we have to take, is to appreciate the fact that we can work and be independent. But unfortunately, our system is such that a gentleman in Chillicothe said to me one time, I offered a kid out of high school $30,000 a year as a starting position. And he came back to me and he said, you know, I did the math, I get more for doing nothing, and you want 8 hours a day from me. You know, and so that's a problem. So I propose what we call a sliding scale, where if you take a job, you don't lose all your benefits that you're getting, but you lose a proportion so that you still come out ahead. And then you drive forward. Say you're a clerk in the store, then you're a manager of the store, then you own the store. Gradually you've come off these programs. There's people in America that refuse to be on the programs. They'll take any kind of a job rather than do that. And then of course there's those in America that are mentally and physically unable, and we want to take care of them. And again, we want these programs there because any one of us could be there someday. There's also another group of Americans that have no idea that there's something else. Because right now they're living with generations of these programs, and no one is telling them or really showing them that there is another way out and that you don't have to be in this. And to many, economic opportunity means how do I get as much as I can out of this system as possible. So I call it a sliding scale. In Great Britain they call it tapering. They take these agencies, they put them into one, and you see what an individual or family needs, and you gradually wean them away from it if they're capable. And I think that that's what we need to do. We got to quit punishing work in America. So, you know, it sounds like, yeah, we got a lot of problems, and we do. We always do. And sometimes our problems are pretty minor compared to other countries and other parts of the world. But this is the only place in the world where we have such a thing as a dream, an American dream. And it really is a place of opportunity. And I want to see the federal government be in a position to create opportunity for people, not negate opportunity for people. That's what we should be about. And I think we've distorted the American dream a little bit. So often you hear, you know, oh, everyone's got to go to college. Why? I mean, it's not for everybody. And America was built by a lot of people who didn't go to college. And they're still being built by a lot of people who didn't go to college. That's great. We need people at the higher level, the STEM fields and all that. We need all that because we're short on that in America today. But at the same time, you ask a welder how they're doing today. They're doing pretty darn well. They're making 6 figures. Manufacturing today is so different because you have to be technical. You have to have abilities beyond just, you know, digging a ditch or something. This is much different today. And every one of those people that do that have made things happen for America. It's all part of the team. You need every component of it. And no one should be embarrassed if their job is not from a 4-year degree. Because if they're contributing and they say, I put this roof over my head and this meal on the table, that's the American dream. That's what we need to be emphasizing. And quit putting people down for doing something that's not a 4-year degree. We've just put way too much emphasis on that, and it's expensive. So we're lucky in this country. Again, how many times have you read in your history books where one of our founders or whatever talked about divine intervention? Talk about it all the time. We've got it right now. We have it right now in our lap if you think about it. You know, in the past, it's maybe a battle we weren't supposed to win or a harvest we weren't supposed to have. But right now, we've got energy, We have got energy we never thought we could possibly have. We can be energy independent. We can export energy. We can export energy to the Baltic states that are 100% dependent on Russia for natural gas, breaking that bond and that intimidation from Russia. There's so much we can do with what we have here, besides all the jobs that it can create and the opportunity that it creates for America. So again, we are lucky. I've been around the world a few places, and I got a few more to go. I now serve, besides Armed Services, I serve on the Intelligence Committee, and we go places you don't really want to go. So I'm going to tell you, this is the best place to be, even though we have some problems. You know, a lot of things change. The experiences that you have. When I came back from Iraq, what I realized is that the national anthem, for example, has forever been changed for me. When I hear bombs bursting in air and rockets red glare, I think of those that we couldn't save. But when I think of the last line, the land of the free and the home of the brave, I think of those that have saved us time and time again. But those are just normal, everyday individuals like you and me. And we all have an opportunity to do what we can to save this country and to keep it on a path that the next generation can be proud of. And it just takes us to do it. One thing I wanted to, there's Jerry back there. I got to bring it up, Jerry. You
Go ahead, I know what you're going to say. About the movie theater.
My wife and I, we live in the square here. We got our first anniversary at the inn, went to a movie, went to the Quarter Bistro. Very nice night. And one of the things that they do on military bases before every movie is they play the national anthem. And everybody stands up in the theater. And I think if there's one place in this country that would embrace that and be able to do that, it's right here at that theater down the street. And so I'm going to keep pushing for that. And I'll be glad to take questions. Yes.
What about Pakistan and the Taliban? What do you think we should do?
Well, Pakistan and the Taliban goes to the whole problem with Afghanistan and the Taliban as well. It's another harbor for it. The action that we take, some of the actions that we take are somewhat neutralizing, if you will. I don't like that they're a harbor for that, but they're a very difficult entity to deal with because they do have nuclear weapons, and that makes it a little bit more challenging when you're dealing with them diplomatically. I've met with people from Pakistan. They invited me to come over. I said I don't think I'm quite ready yet. Maybe another time for that, but that's part of the whole problem in the Middle East. But one of the things about the Middle East in general that we have to be thinking about is building an alliances. Just look at ISIS right now, for example, and what they're doing. That's really a case of good versus evil, and so the opportunities for allies exist even more so. We need our NATO-type alliance in that region, but we also need the countries of that region to come together and fight a common enemy. And that we need to see more of, because they don't want to be occupied and they don't want to be pushed around. But if they can be an equal partner in the efforts in the Middle East, they can make a difference. But that's a very challenging question. Pakistan's got to do it. We can't necessarily run into Pakistan and stop what the Taliban's doing, but we certainly...
We give them billions of dollars a year, every year. To offset.
I'm not saying I'm okay with it. I'm just telling you this is a different situation because of the situation that they are in with them being a nuclear country. And maybe those billions of dollars, I don't know, are saving us billions of dollars by them not being more aggressive. It's a very challenging situation. The chessboard in the Middle East is three-dimensional, and I'm telling you, there's not a lot of great answers some days. But I don't agree with what we're doing right now, which is backing away from some of the more obvious challenges. Yeah. Jerry?
Congressman, can you tell us anything at all about the FBI? They uncovered some plots to sell nuclear material to ISIS on 4 occasions, it was reported. I'm glad we caught them, but do we need to know anything that's going on, or can you even tell us anything?
I can't.
Okay.
I mean, truthfully, when I got on the Intelligence Committee, I don't know if many people know, that's a select committee. You're exposed to things that other members of Congress are not. And one of the first things they teach is that this is very well-defined and stays within these rooms. We meet in a special room. And so there's things that you say, I can neither confirm nor deny. That's the expression they told us to say.
Okay.
So I really can't comment on it.
Yeah. Legislation that's controversial that the president might veto
how do we get that up to the president so he will veto it, so that it acts as a reference point to, you know, the voters?
Well, obviously, one way is to have something pass both the House and the Senate and get on the
Right.
president's desk, which very few things have. You know, under Bill Clinton, I believe he vetoed 36 bills. This president's only had to veto like 3 bills because nothing's getting to his desk. We passed last session in the House, amongst the many bills we passed, 382 bills that went to the Senate and died there. And that includes appropriations bills, which is really what we're supposed to be doing. On a little side note, we passed a bill a couple of years ago where we said no budget, no pay. You don't produce a budget, you don't get paid for the House and Senate. Well, the House has been producing, it was no problem. I mean, it's work, we got it done. Finally, the Senate passed one. They passed one in the last 5 years. So I'm for no appropriations, no pay. I mean, we really need to be doing our job and getting things on the president's desk, especially when it comes to how we spend money in the United States.
So the House is doing a pretty good job, and I agree with you, but the Senate is still
holding things up.
Not doing anything, even though it's under a different party.
Well, their cloture rules, those are the rules of the Senate, and it was designed when it was put in to make it the more deliberative body, right? So that you're going to debate things more. But now it's being used to not debate things at all.
There wasn't a 60% or 60 vote majority when they passed the Affordable Care Act, was there?
No, and that's going to get to answer your question, how to get things on the desk. They use reconciliation.
Yes.
And so, for example, right now the conversation around wanting to get something on the president's desk about what we're seeing in the Planned Parenthood videos and the harvesting of fetal tissue. And so one of the methods of getting something about that on the president's desk, so he's on record for vetoing it, is do it through reconciliation in the budget process. So reconciliation is where, you know, the House and Senate have passed some things, and you put those things in there then when it comes through conference and get it on the president's desk, which is how the Affordable Care Act was.
Yeah. Well, there was an issue that, you know, I have mixed opinions on, but my kids go, I don't even know whether I want to be a Republican because it's all social issues with the Republicans. I think social issues are important, but they, you know, I get all this negative feedback from my kids.
Well, I would tend to disagree with that because it's that's considered a social issue, I guess, but it's also who we are as Americans. I mean, for example, we passed a bill in the House that said if a baby during an abortion is born alive, that the healthcare team has a responsibility of keeping it alive, and the president said he vetoed it. But I can tell you personally what happens in the National Defense Authorization Act and in other things. Social issues come into play. They're thrown into these bills from the other side that really I think have no place in there in defense of the country. But that's what happens. So one may say it's one party, another will say it's the other party. It's probably both, to be honest with you, when it comes to some of those things. I wish we'd get down to business. That's why I think if we did no appropriations, no pay, we would get down to business and pass these bills, because then we would get things moved, or you don't get paid.
And you know, that's fine, and I agree that things like that should go through, but we also ought to be talking budget issues at the same time.
Well, that's the whole process.
Yeah, that's what you
The
were
process is budget. You got to start with a budget, and the budget is really about. Budget's not law. The budget is saying these are our priorities. So the House does theirs, the Senate does theirs, supposedly. Then you come together and you conference on it. Then you come up. This is what we both agreed to.
Yep.
Then you do the authorizations. Okay, that's something we're allowed to spend money on, and then we do the appropriations and say this is how much money we're spending. So that the budget is all part of that whole process. So if you get to appropriations, you've done your budget and you've done your authorizations. So that's why I'm saying we get no budget, no pay. Let's go to the other end of it and do no appropriations, no pay, and see what happens.
I think the most valuable thing it is our people. And I'm very concerned that we're on the verge of losing our culture as freedom seekers and hard workers, that because we've taken what we saw as a safety net and turned it into a lifestyle, to the point where a lot of people pursue that lifestyle, and that leads to a lot of these other problems we have. And with all the other issues of the military and the budget, we're so engrossed in all this, we really have a hard time focusing on what I think is what will take us down. And Jefferson's greatest fear was that at one point we would vote ourselves to Treasury. I think we're at the pinnacle of doing that now. Clinton did a very wise thing in his administration with his proportion, the very system you spoke of, and then our current president took that away. What efforts or what do you hear inside in Washington, awareness of this problem and willingness maybe to start by putting that system back and helping this problem get resolved? Because when people sit on a porch with nothing to do because they've been sold back into slavery for a welfare check, and that's a strong statement to make, and I don't make it lightly, but I feel that the system has done that to a degree. They're going to get into trouble. They got nothing to do.
Well,
education isn't important, though. How do we deal with this, and where do we start?
I think sometimes, you know, it's an attitude or an attitude of the nation. A lot of times it's because of politics, and people play politics with it. I mean, I've seen it. It's not the way you would run a business. You know, one of the more moving things, I think, a sign of the times, I guess, if you will. But you have to be unified in talking about it. Some of these things require a real bipartisan effort. But if you've ever seen the movie Cinderella Man, anybody seen that movie? Cinderella Man. True story. True story. Russell Crowe plays James Braddock, who was a boxer in the Depression. And he's making it. He's making it through the tough times. He's winning fights. He's got a few kids, and they're not living large, but he's getting through. He's getting by. He's doing okay. He breaks his hand, and he starts losing fights. They decommission him. He's out of luck. He has to send his kids away with relatives. He goes on government assistance. Every day he goes to the docks trying to get work. It's almost on a daily basis. They came to him one day, and they said, we had a fight scheduled for tomorrow night. So-and-so canceled. I know you haven't been training or whatever, but you want to get back in the ring. And he said, whatever it takes, you know. How much? Tell me how much, I'll do it. And he wins the fight. So they let him fight again. And he keeps winning fights. This is a true story now. So now he's scheduled to fight Max Baer, who's a heavyweight champion of the world, who's killed 2 people in the ring. And they're interviewing him before that fight. And they said, is it true you were on government assistance and you paid it back? And he said, I figure any man who's fortunate enough to live in a country that's kind enough to help him when he's down should pay it back when he's up. He beat Max Baer, became heavyweight champion of the world, and had a successful career after that. Do you see the difference there, though? I mean, that was his feeling about the philanthropic nature of what we are as a country and how we want to look out for each other. And I think that's the attitude we have to bring back to these types of programs. But also, let people know that there is an opportunity out there. No one in this country is denied a basic education. I mean, these things are there. So we've got to be talking about that from the top, about the opportunity exists for every American. You know, when I was a kid, you'd go in the classroom and they'd have little cardboard cutouts of, you know, doctors, firemen, laborers, whatever. It just inspired you. You're going to be something. You're going to do something. And I don't know that kids dream of that today. I don't know that they sit and think necessarily, unless, you know, it's maybe coming from home, but I don't think it's just there the way it was when I was a kid. And I know every generation says, well, when I was a kid, it was better and this and that. I get that. But I do think that's there to some degree. Nothing's impossible in this country. Nothing, you know. And you know, I talked about the Wright brothers. You know, I mean, look at just in Ohio, the Wright brothers to Neil Armstrong. You know, I am quite sure they grew up feeling that nothing was impossible that they could accomplish. So I think that's what we need to keep hearing from the top, from every level of government. That, you know what, America, you can do it. Every individual can succeed, and don't let anyone tell you you can't. It's not always going to happen. Nothing's 100%. But I think that there is a cultural change and an attitude change. But look, America has been through tough times before. I just talked about the Depression. We've had a civil war that tore this country apart like nobody's business. If you go back to our founders, basically they committed treason to begin this country. So we've been through a lot of tough times, and we come out of it. We come out of it, you know. Netanyahu was talking about the Iran deal and how in 10 years they can do whatever they want. And he said, 10 years is a blink of an eye to a nation. And it really is. I mean, think about it. It was almost 15 years ago that 9/11 happened. That seems like it wasn't that long ago. So we have our ups and downs, we have our differences of opinion, and the way the government's set up to work, we're supposed to debate, we're supposed to argue, but we're supposed to come out and do something at the end of the day. And that's what I think is missing in a lot of ways. And leadership to inspire.
I had the opportunity to listen to you before, and I always like what you hear. And I had an opportunity to ask you a question before. Perhaps we shouldn't act just as your constituents watching you, putting you in office, watching you, saying, man, I hope he does the right thing. But to realize that we're a team. We're a team. So my question is, what could we do for you? I loved your answer last time.
Pray. We're here to change it.
That's exactly what you said.
Yeah. And I do mean that. I don't know where, Abraham Lincoln once said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, I found myself falling to my knees in prayer, for I had nowhere else to turn. And I think we all face that in our lives, and we face that as a nation sometimes. And I know it does a lot for me, and I think it can as a nation.
Who do you think will be the next speaker?
I really don't know. I wish I could tell you, I don't know. Paul Ryan's like me, wants to be home every weekend with his wife and kids. And when you're in that job, that makes it extremely difficult to do. I think he is very policy oriented, and that's why he likes being the chairman of Ways and Means and driving policy forward. So I don't know if he's gonna, and I don't know that he'll get 218 votes. But until we get somebody who can get 218 votes on the floor of the House, over 50% of the body, then it's John Boehner. I mean, that's by law. He doesn't have to be the representative anymore. I see a lot of these guys on the radio and TV that are always complaining about the speaker. And I don't always agree with the speaker, but I'm just saying, you want to complain about it, guess what? You're Sean Hannity, you're eligible to run. I'm just saying, you got all the ideas, step up and run. Show us what you got. So, anyway.
Is there anyone else that would be possible?
Yeah, I got an email from Bill Flores from Texas, who's the chair of the Republican Study Committee. He's saying he might, or I don't know. We obviously saw Daniel Webster, Jason Chaffetz. Nobody that I know of right now can get to 218. And I always think that as a conference, we have our vote privately, and whoever gets it, that's who we should vote for on the floor, but that's just me. I said to one of the guys the other day, I was standing in front of our packed room of all the Republican members sitting there, and I'm standing next to Steve Stivers, who's also in the National Guard and deployed to Iraq. I said, remember when you were in your hangar getting ready to leave for Iraq, and all the troops are standing there, and you looked out over the troops, and how you felt like we are ready to go. We are one, we are here for each other, we are ready to go. I said, do you get that feeling looking out here? He said, no. So, that's where we need to get,
The selection of a president, I think you could look at it based on experience. You can look at it based on inside or outside characteristics. You look at it on knowledge-based statistics. I kind of often look at it on basically the characteristics, and I just ask you for commentary. Characteristics like pick the unifier, pick the transparent one, pick the one that's priorities or hearts. My notion is, do you have a sense for, from a character or disposition kind of basis, pick the president who?
He's probably in my books and long gone. But no, somebody asked me one day in a high school, they said, you as a doctor, do you think Ben Carson's uniquely qualified to be president of the United States? I said, do you think a community organizer is uniquely qualified to be president of the United States? Do you think a peanut farmer is uniquely qualified to be president of the United States? Do you think a Hollywood actor is uniquely qualified to be president of the United States? I said, there's a lot of things that go into being president of the United States, and it's a lot about yourself, but it's also a lot about the team that you build around you and how you're able to lead that team. And so I don't think it really comes down to any one individual to be successful. I can't, I always said the same thing in surgery. We got some arrogant surgeons sometime, and they like to yell at, not too much today, but when I first started, there were surgeons like that. And I go, you know what? There's not anything you do in that operating room you can do by yourself. You need that nurse handing you the instruments, and you need everybody in there to make this happen. So don't, so it's important to put together a team that you can count on, and I do believe too, when you do that, you want somebody that's going to tell you no sometimes. I've got that in my office, and sometimes I've been very grateful when they've directed me a little bit differently. So,
Brad, just curious. Who from your past do you admire the most and why?
My parents.
They did a good job.
First of all, thanks for your service. You've done a heck of a job. And I've gone to your website a few times and very impressed with your website, the technology there. I mean, for being a doctor.
That's the staff.
Yeah. Well, that gets back to your point. If you surround yourself, it's very obvious that as a podiatrist, you didn't have the best, probably, infrastructure from a technology point of view, but very impressive. And the communication back and forth is excellent as well.
Thank you. We do take pride in that. No letter unanswered. We try to communicate weekly with a wrap up and things like that.
But something that comes across my email, probably like a lot of people's, that you don't really talk about in general, is people talk about if you have a Congress where we're in a situation where we can't get a lot of things done, is it fair that the Congress, after one term or whatever it is, gets automatic pension, automatic pay increases?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because none of that happens.
Well, I've heard that it doesn't happen.
And I get that question. A lot of times I would go out and that would be the first thing I talk about. I said,
so why does that keep going around then?
Congress does not get paid their salary the rest of their life. God, who would do it twice? I mean, really, we do not get paid our salary the rest of our life. We pay into Social Security. We are in the Affordable Care Act. The President and Vice President are not. The Supreme Court and their staff are not. But Congress, it was the Grassley Amendment to the Affordable Care Act, presented by Senator Grassley, who said, okay, you're going to pass this, you're living with it too. We're all going to live with it too. And so that did pass. So, we're paying the higher premiums and the higher deductible and doing the whole 9 yards and went through the sign up. Pension, I don't even know what it is. They told me at 5 years you start to become eligible to pay into something. My wife's a financial consultant. She goes, I don't think you'll ever get out what you put in. So that's the word there. But people believe that, and right, they read it on the internet, and I've read it for years, all of those things. So, and we have not had a pay raise. I don't even know when the last pay raise was, but there's no cost of living increase for Congress. And as a matter of fact, many of the members sleep in their office.
Okay.
And if I wasn't married and have a child, they come up for 2 weeks at a time and then come home for 2 weeks. And they usually come up when we finish on Friday and start again on Monday, and that way I'll come home for the weekend, do events or whatever. And then the other 2 weeks, I'm usually here one of the weeks, like this week. And so we're not apart very much. We pay for our own, my flights are covered, their flights we pay for. The apartment we have there, it's a 1-bedroom. And my son sleeps in a walk-in closet when we're there. So just to dispel, it's not a bad life. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying some of the things that you hear about aren't true. None of us were forced to run for office. But the benefits that people talk about aren't true. There's no golden plan for members of Congress anyway.
Brad, I have one last concern. Is it true, I feel that our president, when a general tells him something he doesn't want to hear, he gets another general. Is that happening in the White House and with our military?
I can't tell you what's taking place in those conversations in the military when we have our hearings are very You know, I'm in the military. There's things I don't say or do in uniform because of the structure of things, right? And so that's how it is for our generals. They will always tell you, I'm not here to talk about policy. Basically, they're handed the policy. They can advise. Then they're handed the policy that's coming from the commander-in-chief, and they have to try and make it work as best they can. I mean, I asked a question one time. For example, this made no sense to me, but the president wanted a new authorization for use of military force, AUMF it's called. So after 9/11, the AUMF said go after Al-Qaeda and associates and terrorists anywhere in the world. You know, you have the authority to do that. That's really where we were in 2001. That's still on the books. That hasn't been taken off. The president wanted a new one, but when he wanted for Iraq, and what he wanted in it was to say that we will not use brigade level troops, that we're going to keep it to a minimum. Well, I mean, General Dempsey's retired now, but he said it to me privately, no one says what you won't do when you're talking about your enemy. You don't say we're not going to do something. You let them think you're coming with everything. You let them think you have more than you have. But don't say what you're not going to do. This didn't make any sense. So I did ask General one day in here, I said, that request in the AUMF is can you finish the sentence for me, General? That request in the AUMF is a good idea because, and he goes, well, if I could take another tact on that, Congressman, I said, I figured you would. He said, I will always ask you whatever I need. So what actually happens there, I don't know. But, and they're not likely to tell you. Yes, ma'am.
This is a whole big can of worms here, but I don't understand how so much of our news media, PBS, so forth, I love Masterpiece Theater and everything, how do they seem to become so liberal? And in colleges, I've taught in college, the professors are so liberal. Everything's wrong with our country. And they should try working in a business before they start complaining about everything. I don't understand where this really first started. And not that I'm a cut and dried, down the line conservative. I just feel like many of the news networks aren't covering the objectively, they're so biased. I don't understand how this bias is even
I don't know how it
accepted.
happened. One of the shows that I prefer, if you want to, people ask me what do I want to watch for news. One, I would maybe read the Wall Street Journal. Two, watch Brett Baer because I think he has a balanced, intelligent panel, and they actually have adult conversations about the issues of the day. And that's my advice to people. And the other stuff, I'd say just turn it off, but we've really gotten away. I mean, if you listen carefully to most reports today, they're more than just giving you the facts. There's usually an opinion in there as well.
Yeah, I was very interested in your comment that you've spent more time with Netanyahu than you have with our own president. Question is, do you feel our policymakers have a real understanding of Islam and what is really going on with Islam?
I think that there's a huge denial taking place of what's going on with radical Islam. I served in Iraq. I met a lot of good people. We liberated 26 million people. I'm convinced that at the end of the day, the Iraqi people had more faith in the American soldier than they did in their own government. And I think we earned that. Mm-hmm. And especially difference during the surge when Petraeus moved us off our bases and out into the neighborhoods. If you're out of water, we're out of water. If your power's out, our power's out. It made a big difference. I worked with interpreters, you know, and one day I remember one of the guys said, we had about 8 interpreters working in our hospital. And one of the guys said, so do you know if we're Sunni or Shia? I said, I have no idea, you know, which you are. And he said, it's 4 and 4. He said, do you think we get along? I said, yeah. So most of the people there do get along, want to get along, want the same things we want. They just want to raise their family, you know, have some kind of a life. Most of the people. But when you're seeking power, then you start pitting people against each other. And so when I got this little boy who was working on his hand and his leg and he's been blown up, and the dad says he was just on his way to school and the 4 other boys are dead that he was with. You're mad at somebody. Somebody just killed your kids. And if you're Shia, you're mad at Sunni. If you're Sunni, you're mad at Shia. I don't even know what this kid was. Or what his family. So it becomes those amongst power that abuse it. But I think we are at the top, burying our head in the sand about what is taking place. There's a lot of good people in this world, and they're being dominated in that part of the world by people that aren't, and that's a problem. And I will tell you, one of those interpreters today, he got a Fulbright scholarship, got his master's in public health at Emory University. He's been to my house for Thanksgiving. He went back, married his girlfriend from, was in med school with him in Iraq, and she's Lebanese. He's an American, his wife is an American, his kids are American. He's doing a cardiology fellowship at Johns Hopkins University today. His brother-in-law, another one of our interpreters, I never knew it was his brother-in-law, because they for security reasons, they didn't tell, because we lost 3 interpreters while I was there. When they'd go home to visit their families, if they were discovered, they were killed. And so the other brother-in-law, he was going to stay in Iraq. He calls me up a few years ago, and he goes, I've been identified. You know, I'm at the hospital, and this guy had like blue eyes, right? So he kind of stands out. The guy said, you were helping the Americans at Abu Ghraib, I remember you. And then they went to his home and tried to kill his family, but he got him out. So he's in hiding, and he's eligible for a special visa. And we were able to, so from my military role, I was able to be his sponsor and say, yes, I worked with him for a year. And he ended up getting he was still waiting for it. Then I got in Congress, and he was still waiting. So I had a meeting with immigration people in my congressional office, and he's here now too, and he's applying for residencies. So, you know, I got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And so I have you know, it's kind of like as a doctor when there's a bad doctor, right? You're embarrassed, you know, and so. But this is a growing entity, and this is an act of evil, and it's not just terrorism right now, because it's actual armies. But you know, that's one component to fight is the hit here and there. But ISIS is an actual army. They're taking land, they're taking wealth, and they don't mind dying, and they are about as evil as anything we've probably ever seen in the face of the earth.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the personal level, but my question was also just about looking at the deal with Iran and looking at some of the other statements American leaders have made in Israel, for example, leads you to believe that there isn't an Arabic-speaking scholar of Islam or a well-understood scholar of Christianity or the scriptures who can actually say this is what they're doing and this is what's going on. And that was my question. Do you sense that there's that level of intelligence being applied into the process? Or is it separated because it's, quote, religious?
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I really understand the question, to be honest with you, so I apologize. I mean, to the Iran deal, it's as naive as anything I've ever seen.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying death to America. They're not changing their mind. We got nothing out of this. We went from inspections anywhere, anytime, to 24 days, and you can inspect yourself. And we haven't even seen the deal, because it's the International Atomic Commission that is supposed to be doing it. And Americans haven't even seen it. John Kerry supposedly hasn't seen it. The President hasn't seen it. So the inspection deal is out of our hands. And listen, you know, no one has to tell me anything more than what I saw in Iraq. You know, we had a hearing, and one guy defending the deal said, oh, the Iranians are writhing in pain from these sanctions. And I couldn't wait till it was my turn. I said, sir, you don't know what writhing in pain looks like. And I do. And it's that American soldier who has had his legs blown off. by weapons provided by Iran. And he's fighting for his life. That's writhing in pain. If there are people writhing in pain, it's because of their leadership. And if they would acquiesce, then it wouldn't have to be that way. They could be a thriving nation with the rest of the world. So don't tell me that they're writhing in pain. Now the sanctions, you take the sanctions off, they start getting money, and it's just going to feed the frenzy of what they're already doing and doing even more of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Because it is the most naive deal, and it was as one of my colleagues said, we got them right where they want us.
Yeah.
Do you think if we get a new president next year that wants to do better, we can change that agreement, or is it too late?
Well, we're still working on that because the deal itself changes treaties that are in place. And it doesn't have the authority to change treaties that are in place, for one. The other bill that we put forward to try and stop this process is, and it was one of the members, Pat Meehan, who really discovered it. So we've had a lot of victims of Iranian terrorism on Americans, and they've had their court cases, and they've been granted awards from these cases, from the damage to them or to their families, the families of those left behind. And the money is supposed to come from the frozen assets of Iran, and they're refusing to do it. And so how can this deal negate all that? Because that's the same money. The money we're giving back to them is the money that's supposed to go in these awards to Americans. So we're rewarding them and punishing Americans.
So you put a lien on that money that we're holding, I guess.
Well, that's why we passed the bill to make that a binding case that, how do you do this when that's taking place? And then the other component is actually breaking existing treaties. And, it was Congress that passed the sanctions. President Obama signed increased sanctions, and we're the ones that have to take them back. So everything is wrong with this. It was politically mischievous from the get-go. If that's the best way to put it. Yes, sir.
It's, as this lady said over here, it's pretty clear that our national debt's high, and that the president wants to spend more and more money, which would, give us a terrible debt situation. Foreign policy, we're down in Libya, we're down in the African states, they're threatening the Baltic, Ukraine. The president isn't doing much. And so the TV, we got about 4 or 5 networks that say, oh, this is great, we support the East Coast, the West Coast. And so we've got Fox that comes out and gives the other opinion. It was interesting on 60 Minutes, this last Sunday, they really went at the president on foreign policy. It was a great program. So we've got the situation now where we've got the election coming up again. Ohio supported Governor Rhodes for 4 terms. We don't win the presidency unless we carry Ohio. Battleground state, our governor's running. So, to some degree, humbly, the ball is in our court. The residents of Ohio, the residents of Mariemont, of Hamilton County, these bordering counties, to pick up the ball, to get active, humbly to go to the streets, to communicate with people so that we produce a win, the Republicans in Ohio.
You're hired.
And so is everybody here who's come out.
That's right.
This is what we need to win
That
in Ohio.
is exactly right. I mean, I can tell you what people told me, what happened in their neighborhoods, how organized President Obama was. They would do a phone call, poll, or whatever. You disagreed with something, yet somebody went knocking on their door. Somebody went knocking on their door specifically and said, well, try and turn them the other way. It was a tremendous grassroots effort. In America, we do have that opportunity. Someone asked me, what do you think about term limits? I said, well, that's kind of up to the voters every time, really. So, that's one way of limiting someone's term is through the voters. But we are a key state. It really hit me when I won the primary, and it's my first time in politics. I'm running for the general election. A gentleman called me, Peter Roscom. He's from Chicago area, And he said, hey, my kids go to Miami and I'm going to be down in the area. You got anything going on? And this is before the last presidential. I said, yeah, we got this rally out in Sharonville, and if you want to come and speak and get on stage with us, that'd be great, come by. And he comes and goes, this is great, because there's no election in Illinois, right? So the presidential election comes down, and I tell people in the rural communities all the time why you don't get much attention from the president, because winning the presidency comes down to a few states and a few cities. It doesn't come down to Wilmington, Ohio, or Georgetown, Ohio. I mean, I guess it could, but you know what I'm saying. By and large, that's what it comes down to. And so we are in the thick of it. You can consider Ohio ground zero. I always kind of took it for granted. But then you start to realize other states, there's nothing going on. There are no signs, there's nothing, because it's a foregone conclusion a lot of times.
Mobilization.
Yeah.
Very good. Brad, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Buck a piece, 6 for $5.
All right.
Yay!
Let me help you, Brad.
I wouldn't give him your money, Brett.
I think you know where to find me.
Yeah. All right, we'll get, so we'll meet next month on the 19th. That's a Thursday before Thanksgiving. And
Yeah, are we gonna do the peace and all that like we've done in the past?
yeah, so that will be essentially our Christmas our pizza party and such, and then we'll be we won't formally have a meeting until then, March, as far as an actual meeting here. So thanks for coming, and see you around the village.